on today's show.
What he did when we went down there is he called us together and said, we do $400 million at invoice today, P&G to Walmart. I have a really cool shirt, one for everybody in this entire room who was on the team. There were 11 of us originally, and it had already grown to probably 25 or 30 by this time. And he said, no one gets a shirt, and you can't wear the shirts, the sweatshirts, until we get to $1 billion in annual sales. So we were 400 million. We had to grow 2.5 times to get there. And it was an interesting motivational piece, and we all wanted that shirt very, very badly.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Creator Institute podcast. Your host, Harry Campbell.
Hey everyone, on today's episode, we're going to meet Harry Campbell. And Harry is the author of a series of books that recently came out on Get Real Leadership and Get Real Culture. But what was so fascinating about talking to Harry is understanding the fact that he doesn't see himself as a writer. He doesn't see himself as someone who's particularly designated to be an author, but he was inspired by his wife's battle with brain cancer and wanted to find a way to give back. And he wrote his books in a lot of ways, in a way without writing. He had a co-collaborator where he would speak, they would record it, they would transcribe it, and they would turn that into his book. So he jokingly says, I really didn't write my books. I had a lot of help and recorded it, which I think is inspirational for all of us to know that you don't necessarily have to be someone who wants to plug away at a computer and do it. But I think what was also just as powerful is recognizing that writing a book with a clear purpose behind it can open some incredible doors. And just the fact that Harry has been able to donate hundreds of thousands of dollars from speaking and writing and publishing his books has shown you that what the power of this sort of the cause can be. And I think that his messages of sort of being really thoughtful, being very, very much about telling your stories and sort of being authentic is a powerful one. So you'll enjoy the talk with Harry. I did, because I think it shared this concept of, you write these things for your own purpose and your own mission. And I think with Harry, you'll see just that. He's someone who has the reputation as a fixer, going in and jumping into companies and fixing the things that were wrong. He talks a lot about his adventures in startup land and also his adventures in sort of the big company land. But he has had a terrific background, and I think you'll really enjoy our conversation with Harry Campbell. All right. Welcome everyone today. I'm super stoked to be talking to Harry Campbell, who we were connected through a mutual friend, Diana Kander. And Harry has had a pretty incredible adventure, and I'm excited to sort of dive into it and chat a little bit about his recent books that he's written and how it sort of changed his adventure, and particularly done some fascinating things for some of the charity works that he's been a part of. So Harry, welcome. Great to meet.
I am looking forward to it. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So Harry, I want to, to sort of set the stage a little bit for everyone about your adventure. In some ways, it's you are basically kind of the traditional success path early in your career. You basically have every name brand a guy could want early in his career, checking all those fancy schmancy companies along the way. And I read somewhere that someone described your trajectory kind of in those the last few years of your career as you're a fixer. So what does it mean to have the label as Harry Campbell, fixer?
It means that I have a love of wading in when things aren't good, taking care of business, making things right, and then getting a trajectory that is, I would say, dramatically different than before. And what's crazy about it is I didn't really like the idea of being called that, but I get bored easily. Mm-hmm. And so one of the ways to keep me from being bored was to put me into things that needed fixing, because they require all sorts of energy and focus for quite a long time until they get fixed. But it's also true that after I get things fixed, I get bored again. So I'm airlifted out, slid over and airlifted in somewhere else. And I used to kind of be puzzled a little bit about what people thought about or whether it mattered that I was considered the fixer. And then I decided, you know what the hell, embrace it. It's what I do. It's what I love to do. And it's what I've done.
That's right. I think it's there's a sort of fascination out there a lot of times with people, and I see it a lot where people always want to be sort of the entrepreneur, and there's this kind of glorification of the cult of the founder. And I think that what's interesting is there's actually like a large number of people that apply their entrepreneurial skills, mindset, methodology. It's exactly what you're describing, but do it in oftentimes the process of fixing things, expanding things, growing things, and I think the process of being entrepreneurial has a lot of methodologies, and I think you're probably the classic intrapreneur if you were to use the definitions of a fixer.
Eric, that's incredible perspective. I tell people frequently that I'm not an entrepreneur. My risk profile is not right. I grew up with Teachers for Parents. Didn't have a lot of money, much more security oriented, but I'm an extrovert. I've got undiagnosed ADHD, and I'm just kinetically wound. And so what happens is I love being around entrepreneurs. I love mentoring them. I love investing in them. I like them on my team, even though I'm not. And so what I've found is the success that I have is harnessing their energy and putting it in the right direction, because it's not me, but I love being around them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It's a magical thing when you find someone who has that. But I think, to your point, sometimes without the right sort of environment, people, coaching, and that sort of stuff, that superpower of being having the right risk profile and the right approach to it can sometimes be muted without folks like the Harry Campbells of the world around them to make them great. So it's awesome.
Very fair.
Yeah. So I want to, obviously I did a little bit of my homework on this one, and I want to chat a little bit about a story that you talk about in your books. Actually, you talk about it in both of them a little bit. Is I want to talk about the $1 billion team sweatshirts. And I was so fascinated by that story, and particularly what led a young, handsome Hoosier graduate decide to move himself to Arkansas. So why don't you tell the story a little bit about the story around the $1 billion team and your experiences with the Procter & Gamble?
I'd love to. So out of undergrad, I went directly to business school and got my MBA. I was a liberal arts major at Vanderbilt and then got my MBA in marketing from Indiana.
Yeah, you're like a classic case study of someone, East Asian studies, sort of the lack of practicality in that one makes me go crazy thinking about you now, right? Like, what were you thinking?
I was trying to keep that on the down low. So you both my undergraduate major was East Asian history and economics double major. I really have no idea what I was doing. Maybe I was going to go to law school. Maybe I was going to be a teacher. Maybe I didn't have a plan. That would be it. Yes.
It's good.
So I had my MBA in marketing, and I chose to go to Procter & Gamble. They wanted me and I wanted them because I needed to learn. I really didn't know anything about business. It was, I grew up in a very small farming town as a professor's kid. So there was a liberal arts college and a bunch of farmers in our town. I didn't really know much about business. So Procter & Gamble was a great choice. I'd been there 3.5 years or so. And after turning down the opportunity to be promoted and moved to an international assignment in Osaka, Japan, I was approached with the idea of being one of the founding members of a very entrepreneurial venture within P&G, where we would have one person or more from each of the functions of the company move to Northwest Arkansas and form a customer team liaison with people from Walmart and try to make the business between Procter & Gamble and Walmart better. It was a vision that Sam Walton had because P&G was the biggest vendor to Walmart and Sam's. When I say Walmart, I mean Walmart, all their stores combined, counting their club stores. Yep. And P&G's biggest customer was, in fact, Walmart, but the companies didn't get along at all. Nobody from P&G lived anywhere near Northwest Arkansas. what would happen was, I think P&G probably had 7 divisions. 7 salespeople would fly into Bentonville, maybe once a month, sell their wares one division at a time separately, and fly out. And we were asked to move down there, interact, understand, develop ways to do the business. And one of the interesting points that Sam Walton made about the customer team was that nothing we were going to do was going to be proprietary with Walmart and vice versa. Our competitors were going to be able to do it because it was running the business better, and everybody needs to benefit.
Yep.
However, being able to develop it and get ahead of it would give us an advantage by itself. So that was Sam's vision. When you were talking about the $1 billion team T-shirts, it was fascinating. The leader we had down there, Tom Muccio, for Procter & Gamble, was an extraordinary leader and motivator, and he was where I learned a lot of my, I would say, leadership tendencies and practices. What he did when we went down there is he called us together and said, we do $400 million at invoice today, P&G to Walmart. I have a really cool shirt, one for everybody in this entire room who was on the team. There were 11 of us originally, and it had already grown to probably 25 or 30 by this time. And he said, no one gets a shirt, and you can't wear the shirts, the sweatshirts, until we get to $1 billion in annual sales. So we were 400 million. We had to grow 2.5 times to get there. And it was an interesting motivational piece, and we all wanted that shirt very, very badly.
Do you still have the shirt?
I do not. In one of my moves, I lost it, which really bums me out.
Yeah.
I have pictures of me wearing the shirt, and my memories from 1989, 90, and 91 down in Northwest Arkansas are unbelievably vivid, but I don't have the shirt. Dang.
This might mean we need to create these shirts here. I might
redo them. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And by the way, the fascinating thing is we worked extraordinarily well with Walmart, ran the business, grew share for P&G products in the categories there. And the goal was to be $1 billion in 3 years. We actually made it a year early, and the story is actually pretty phenomenal. On the last day of the fiscal year, when we needed to get to $1 billion, otherwise, no matter what, it was going to go to another year. An order that I put in for a relatively small set of products, including like oil of Olay and some other beauty care and healthcare products in Scope and Crest, put us over the $1 billion. I think it was about 3:20 in the afternoon on the last day of the year to beat our goal by an entire year, and the team got their shirts. And let me tell you, you've never seen a happier bunch of folks.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's and I'm sure, it's a funny thing, right? Like, it's just a shirt in a lot of ways. People may be like, oh, what's the big deal about the shirt? But it's sort of the vision behind the shirt that makes that shirt almost have magical powers to it that I'm sure all of you thought this was worth it.
Yes, it was. There was an incredible pride factor. There was a sense of accomplishment. There was a sense of teamwork. There was recognition of the leadership from Sam Walton and also Tom Muccio. It was all these things bundled together.
That's amazing. And so, you sort of have in a lot of ways, I would say, kind of a traditional career path after that in a lot of ways, right? You joined Sprint, and, in a lot of ways, you're like an aspirational guy who's kind of, fixing stuff, keep being jumped along the way. Tell me a little bit about your experience kind of in growing from, the early days at Sprint all the way until you became president of the emerging market division.
Happy to. So after close to 7 years at Procter & Gamble, including 3 in Northwest Arkansas, I was ready to spread my wings. I did choose to join Sprint in 1992. So I'm 7 years into my career. I was hired as a director in the marketing group. I kept getting additional responsibility, and I have a very simple secret: treat people really well and make good decisions about the business, and the career takes care of itself. I had a couple of extraordinary mentors. I had a couple of breaks. I was blessed in a couple of areas, and all of a sudden I found myself a vice president in 1997, only a few years after I'd gotten to Sprint, quite young at that point. Wow. 26 years old or something like that. 1997. Okay. So how does that play out? All of a sudden, I got an itch. A friend of mine who owned a small company decided to bring me on as a co-owner, and I quit my vice president job at Sprint. Yeah, what was I thinking?
This the risk adverse guy here.
I know, and I, the fact is, it was already a up and going business. It was a sports marketing firm that sold hours. We worked with companies who wanted to use sports to build their business, so I didn't have to grow it. I didn't have to start it. I needed to come in, fix some of the culture issues, fix the business a little bit, and make it supercharge growth. And that's exactly what we were able to do. There's a pretty prestigious award in Kansas City called the Mr. K Award for Ewing Kauffman, and it's given to the Small Business of the Year. And we actually won that. The company amazing. Was called MAI. We won that in 1998. And I absolutely loved it. It was phenomenal. I love sports. I was able to drive growth. I didn't have to start the company, and it worked extraordinarily well. And then all of a sudden, I got an itch again. Maybe it's because I got bored because things were going too well. Okay, I don't know. And what I did was in 1999, I realized the NASDAQ's going crazy up. Yep. The world of internet startups is nuts. If you really want to understand the business environment, I always tell people, go look at historical Super Bowl advertising. They cost an incredible amount of money. They're 30-second ads, and there was a 2-year period in 99 and 00 where most of the Super Bowl ads were .coms that didn't have much of a business model and didn't have much revenue. They had a lot of funding.
Pets.com.
That's the .com craze, run up and then bust. Well, during the run up, I decided I was going to make $1 trillion by joining one of those companies.
It's perfect.
Did some interviewing on the West Coast, some house hunting trips, got verbal offers, never written offer. Thank goodness. And then finally ended up getting into the world of internet, but in Kansas City as first the vice president of marketing, and then very quickly after that, the president and CEO of an internet startup. So once again, this is the non-risk taker. Diving into this, and I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing when I look up and go, wow, I didn't start.
You're a hypocrite. You're just a big hypocrite here. The non-risk taker is now the CEO of a startup company in 2000. Internet startup. Come on now.
And unfortunately, the business was really founded on eyeballs and advertising revenue, and that was way too early for that type of business model. It was not possible. We did not make our metrics. We raised money. We had a good amount of money, but didn't have the business model that would work. So it was we were a digital spinoff from a larger company, and that larger company folded the company back in, and I was no longer needed. So at basically, I think it was the age of 39, I found myself unemployed and in Kansas City, having done a really cool traditional job at P&G and Sprint, and then been the owner of a small business that was wildly successful, and then in a crazy moment, sold my half of that. And now I was in an internet startup and it didn't work. I didn't want to leave the city, so I decided to go back to Sprint. So the genesis of your question is that my career at Sprint was amazingly different. I did 5 years. And then I was gone for those almost 4 years when I was in small business and internet startup. And then I came back to Sprint. The difference that I had with regard to how I approached the business and people and culture was very, very different. I had been whacked around. There's nothing like being humbled, but I've also learned. I'd been hands-on in small business. I'd learned the kind of people that I like to hitch my wagon to, that I like to mentor. And all these lessons that I learned between the ages of about 35 to 39, when I took basically a hiatus from the corporate world and joined this small business, 20 people, and then an internet startup. I will tell you, if I was going to get a doctorate and have a PhD, that was it. That was it with regard to business progress. It was it with regard to understanding how I can lead, given my personality, understanding how people tick, understanding the importance of culture. All that was learned in this crazy 35 to 39-year-old period where I just took a sabbatical from the corporate world. When I went back to Sprint, I was different. I had pretty big jobs, but then I got lucky. You really got to get lucky sometime. My boss, who was the president of one of the big divisions, was needed elsewhere in the company. They moved him, and they gave me the interim title of president of the consumer business at Sprint. I was probably 5 years earlier than they wanted. The senior execs at Sprint were looking for a person to fill the job, but I'm sneaky in a way. I just take care of business. They didn't find anybody for 6 months, looked up and said, the culture's going great. The business results are there. We found our guy. He's internal. And so I got to do a high five and was promoted to president. I guess I was about 41, right in that time, in that age range. And I might have been a little bit over my head, but the great part about it, when you've already been slapped around and humbled and worked in the world of internet startups, you don't worry about stuff like that. What you do is you try to surround yourself with great people and have them make you look really good.
Yep. So I read an interview that you gave, and you describe sort of one of the keys to success in life that you talk about in your book is embracing the crookedness. And so I think, whatever you want to call it, I think that certainly is that it sort of looked different. Looking at it from the outside, you may think like, this doesn't make any sense. This guy goes to be a small business owner, to be an internet startup bust in some ways, and then back to the corporate and advance his way early. Talk about this concept, that what you've learned about this concept of crookedness and how it sort of plays into success.
You know what? I love that statement. First of all, it startles people when I put it on a screen to start talking about it, because the first thing they think of is crookedness with regard to integrity. It has nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
It has to do with, here's the plan. Now, you need to understand the plan's not going to happen. Something's going to go wrong. You might get a flat tire on the way to work, or your boss may go sideways, or your competitors may do something, but the plan's going to change. And so what you have to do is you have to not just say, uh-oh, you have to embrace that and say, okay, that happened. Let's not worry about that. Let's figure out what we're doing next. And I think that's when I started to become the fixer, because I never worried about the past. I said, where are we now? Where do we want to go? And let's get it done. And the crookedness became something I took pride in, because I was continually put in things that were broken, messed up, needed fixing, and were crooked.
It's amazing. I think that it reminds me of the Mike Tyson quote, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth.
I love that quote.
I think it sort of fits in with crookedness, is that it's fine to have that plan, but God love you if you think that's actually going to happen. So it's pretty amazing.
The plan was for you to hit me with a right hand, and you hit me with the left. Right. That's not fair. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And then those 3 uppercuts in the middle there. Now that's even less than fair while I was thinking about it. So it's amazing.
Embrace the crookedness. I'm glad you found that one, because that's one of my favorites.
I love it. So I want to kind of fast forward a little bit. You had you continued on that path, and then I want to talk about your stint as an author, because part of this is all about, we call this kind of class of folks that are creating these things creators. And so I actually, I'm a big believer that writing a book is an act in being an entrepreneur. So I think whether you call yourself an entrepreneur, as an author, you are yourself an entrepreneur. But I want to hear about the decision. In a lot of ways you had sort of, I would in a lot of ways describe as a traditional path, and then you go out and say like, all right, I'm gonna write a book. And as someone who I saw in one of your talks described yourself as someone who did not enjoy writing a lot, this is sort of a crazy little leap to write a book. Tell me why you decided to write a book.
Sure. The genesis of this was that my wife was diagnosed with an inoperable malignant brain tumor in early 2004. Shocked and stunned us. The good news is that it was an astrocytoma, which is a slow growth, but nonetheless, it rocked us. Mm-hmm. Over the ensuing years, I was supporting her and doing what I can, and she was getting treatments. But what I realized was I was very poor at really being able to verbalize the support that I wanted to give her. I always loved speaking. The biggest group I had at Sprint, I believe, was about 4,000 people, and I had to figure out how to communicate and inspire and engage with them. So I really took that seriously. I loved doing external speeches, and I realized, maybe I can start doing some speeches, and maybe I can even raise some money as an indication of my support and love for my wife. So I started doing some speeches, and I had a PowerPoint. So in some ways, Eric, I had this backwards. I had a PowerPoint and I had speeches, and I felt like to legitimize myself as a speaker, capture my thoughts, I needed to get it written down.
Yeah.
So instead, I think a lot of people write a book and then turn it into a PowerPoint. I did it the other way around. And I also realized I didn't have the patience to write the book. So I hired a ghostwriter, Maureen Rank, and she was just an absolute all-star. And she happened to have worked in my organization in HR, so she knew me. And my brand is kind of a little bit off-kilter and different. So having somebody that knew me helped.
Yep.
Maureen came in and taped me. She would ask me questions, and I would wave my arms and spit and cuss and tell stories. She would tape it, go away, transcribe it, come back, do another session, come back, do another session. I'm a visual thinker. Then she would turn her thoughts on the organization and ideas of the book into sticky notes. And in the conference room, we would put them up by chapters and ideas, and we would argue and yell at each other about moving things around. So she was the writer of the book, but she was taking my stories so directly. It was just amazing to me. When I finally got to read a draft, I said, "You've captured my brand. My brand is not easy to capture." So I did this to legitimize my speaking business. And now all of a sudden, by the way, I did a space and a half or double space to get the things to 100 pages. I mean, my books are not fancy. They are not. If it takes you over an hour and 20 minutes to read it, you need to go back to school. But they capture the essence of my thoughts. They really outline some of my stories, because at the end of the day, I'm a storyteller. That's what I am.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so that legitimized me. This was in 2012. I finally got around to writing the book, and I realized I'm going to give speeches on this. It was the book was called Get Real Leadership, because I love talking about leadership anyway. And so I started getting speeches booked, and a lot of the reason was because I was more legitimate, quote unquote, as a result of having a book that I was published. I didn't think that was necessarily fair, but there's some logic to it. So I get it.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting too, right? You know, you've, as we shared, you had this sort of successful career. You're leading thousands of people. You're getting promoted earlier. You're having these adventures, and yet this piece of paper, these 100 pages of paper suddenly means something because it's reflective of you. And I think it's really interesting. And to your point a little bit about the writing from a PowerPoint presentation, a speech, it's interesting you say that you did it differently. But because with my students, I have them actually use a PowerPoint deck before they turn their stories into a book structure. Yeah.
Cool.
So it's actually, I call it a teaching deck. So if you can take the stories and the content that you've gathered, and most of them are younger in their careers. They don't have the kind of exact world experience that you had at the time when you created yours. But if they can take that stuff and teach someone else, they can write a book. So I think you're more of a trendsetter than you may realize. But I do think that's a way to that's certainly the way to write a book.
Well, thank you. I love the way you're approaching that with him, because I actually think the way I did it is a pretty logical way to do it, even though I like to describe it as backwards. Yeah. But so once I published this in early 2012, I started getting speeches. And it became extraordinarily important and powerful to me personally, because I love to do it and I'm good at it. But more importantly, it gave me a way to show my wife that I cared about her, I loved her, and I wanted to support her. She was given a pretty low percentage chance to be alive after 10 years. It's now been 13. I decided to give my gross speaking fees to brain cancer research in honor of my wife, and 100% of my book proceeds. I've been blessed with my career, so I didn't need to keep the money. But the cool part about it was it enabled me to do something I loved, and support my wife at the same time. And it took off, I have a full-time job. I'm the CEO of Dury Vision, which is a refractive eye surgery center. They allow me to travel and do speeches. And I would do 23 to 25 a year, legitimate speeches for people like Cisco Systems and Garmin and people like that. And not being famous, that book mattered for people to have. And it makes you feel like a big cheese to sign a book, sit at a table and sign a book and say to somebody, hey, here you go. And so I would earn somewhere between $45,000 and $65,000 a year on the gross fees and the book sales. And I would give that to charity, and it made me feel good. It did something that I was good at. I told stories and talked about leadership, which I loved, and I supported my wife.
Yeah. That's really amazing. And it's a funny thing in some ways that you, something you already love, if you can make it have an additional level of good, it's a project worth doing. It has had this double benefit. It was funny as I was doing some research on you. People oftentimes in their interviews with you or their reviews of you will describe you first now as an author, as opposed to a businessman or a CEO. You're described as, author Harry Campbell. And I'm sure, as you see that, you must think to yourself, if these people only knew.
I do. I feel like, yes. Yeah. Not quite, but I like it. And by the way, I really truly had one keynote speech. And so I got hired and I would give it, and I started to get bored with it, right? I experimented with my stories and I did this. I tend to be paid somewhere between $2,000 and $6,000. Same speech, different people, different budgets. Since I give the money to charity, I don't have to have a pricing strategy, and there's something magical about not having to worry about it.
That's right.
I don't have to explain why why I asked you for $4,000 and you for $6,000. I say, pay me what's fair. Pay me what it's worth to you and what you have in your budget, and I'll say yes. And it worked. Yeah. But I got bored with it. That's why I did the second book. I was like, I gotta be a two-trick pony. And so I hired Maureen again. We got in the conference room again, and we did the same damn thing. It was truncated this time. It probably took about half as long because she didn't have to feel her way through how I thought, how I worked, and understanding my brand. Even though she knew it some, she needed to know it in depth. The second book was much easier from that standpoint. And, Get Real Culture, actually, I am more interested in it. The topic matters to me. It's the way I've been successful. And so I loved the outcome of that process.
It's amazing. And, it's to talk a little bit more about your process that you describe, this concept of finding a partner and interviewing. It's really interesting. So, we use that with some of the students that don't find themselves to be writers. We pair them up with a partner and we have them interview one another, record it and transcribe it, and use that to edit. And so I think a lot of this is built on the premise of the history of writing, so to speak. Some of the great works from Plato and beyond were where there was someone who was the storyteller and there was the scribe. Oh. And so this premise is not, is historically accurate, that it was only since about the early 1900s that we combined the writer had to be the idea person and the scribe. And I think what you're doing is some ways going back to the old school. So we for folks that aren't writers, you don't have to be a quote unquote writer to be a great storyteller. And in some ways, if you're a good storyteller, you should probably be able to write a better book if you have the help to do it.
You know what? I love that. Thank you. That's great perspective because it fits to a T what I think about myself, what my strengths are, and why I think the world of Maureen Rank and what she was able to do for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it. I think you're as much as you probably had to invent a lot of these things as you were going out of pure necessity, being the entrepreneur as it is. I think that there is a lot of sort of logic behind how you approach the book, and again, just not knowing your process, we apply a lot of those same things for the authors that have been working with me here.
Maureen, I think my first book was her 19th or 20th that she had done. So even though she was in HR at a big company, she has a career, and it's full-time now, of ghostwriting. And the really cool thing was she knew the ins and outs of self-publishing and print on demand. And she really helped me drive to the decisions I need to and tell me what I needed to do the pieces of the book that I had to do and to get it done. So she not only was the scribe, but she was the expert with regard to the self-publishing that mattered deeply to me.
So I want to go on that point a little bit. One of the questions people oftentimes will ask, and you've had a very successful career and have been able to launch 2 successful books. Were there ever points of insecurity that you felt about, hey, I don't have a traditional publisher with this book, or hey, I'm not actually writing it? How did you navigate through those ones as saying, does this, did you have to sort of think differently about what you were trying to accomplish with the book, or how did you navigate through those things that someone might trip someone else up?
Very fair. The one thing I didn't ever worry about was traditional publisher, because I never really thought that I had something that would have legitimately been interesting to those folks. And if you really believe that, you don't worry about it. What I wanted to do was try to figure out how I could get something in black and white that could help touch and train people on 2 subjects that are critically important to me, leadership and culture, and at the same time make some money. And so I didn't really worry about it. I was so happy when I figured out that createspace.com, that's what I use, which is kind of a partner of Amazon, that I could do this. And I have no patience, and I don't use my hands, and I don't read directions. And I was able to get this thing published very easily. And that includes getting the number on the book and the UPC and the inside and the artwork and the downloads and uploads and font checks. It was extraordinarily easy. And I was like a kid in a candy store, because the end product was what I wanted. I will add to this, which has completely nothing to what I've just been talking about, but I wanted to be able to write on the spine, which meant the book was thick enough to be able to put the title and my name. So that's one of the reasons why I went space and a half or double spaced. And we put some pages in the back to take notes in, because I wanted it thick enough to be able to write on it. Otherwise, I'm afraid it would have been too thin, and you wouldn't have been able to, you couldn't put it on a bookshelf and see the spine. So it's one of those famous ridiculous things that I had to do. No,
I think it's I think what's interesting hearing your story is you talk a lot about, you were fascinated or fixated on the outcome, not necessarily sort of the process in the middle, right? It's sort of like, whatever. For me, the book is about helping me, raise money, raise awareness, and ultimately be able to elevate your own sort of credibility to be able to book more speaking, which is all coming back to the good that you wanted to do. And so you look at this as a tool as opposed to something you're doing for your own ego. And that's, I think, the magic of what people can see, what your process is, and what I think a lot of people can see about creating these pieces of evidence of credibility, like the book.
You know what? I love that perspective. Thank you. I'm going to take that as a compliment, because that is the way I approached it. I will tell you, though, every once in a while, today something creeps into my mind about I'm a little more impressive than I am. I went this morning to a breakfast, and I signed a book for somebody and gave it to them, and they were fawning over it, and I was all pumped up, and I'm like, yep, I'm an author.
Yeah, here we go.
Yeah, can I get you another one? And fortunately, those moments are few and far between, and I catch myself. But there's a real part of that, because I've sold, I think, 6,000 of my Get Real Leadership and maybe 1,500 of Get Real Culture, which is newer. And I didn't know whether I was going to sell 43, or 1,000 or 20,000. No clue, none.
Yeah, and the average book. I think the average book, I'm told, sells a little less than 200 copies.
Wow.
So you're, it's crazy to think that the average American reads less than a book a year. So we create a lot of books. And so I think but I think what's important that I like to point out is that you didn't just sort of think of this as a book that you were just going to put out there and that was going to be your message. In some ways, the book complements much bigger part of a story, which I think is part of an entire set of speaking and writing and interviewing and things like that you're doing. How do you think about this holistically? When you look at, we're at the end of 2017, how do you look at 2018 for, I want to use this book and platform and things to help generate more revenue for the charities that I want to support?
Well, I love the way you talked about it as a compliment, because that's exactly the way I've always thought of it. In fact, let me get back to 18 here in a moment, but I find myself speaking, being paid to speak, and giving that money to charity. And afterwards, I sit at a table, and kind of one of my hallmark moves is I have a bunch of 10s and it's just cash scattered around, and I have 40 books and people line up and they shake my hand and say, great speech and thank you. And they give me $10 and I give them a book and I get to sign it. And it makes me feel so good because they're giving me direct feedback on the stories and the lessons I gave. I made money already speaking. I'm making money doing the books. And it's just funny to me. I always take a picture of my pile of money. Thank God, this is just absurd that I'm doing this. And I take that and I give that to charity. But the compliment aspect of it is I'm guessing that a lot of people don't read the book. They get it. Right. It's signed. It's fun. They heard me, and that's good. It is a compliment. It is not the end result. It is legitimacy for my speeches is what I think of it as.
That's a great way to think about it.
Which you had asked about 18. 18 now, I'm a year and a half in on my second book. I'm really hitting my stride. So I think I'm going to have another good year, particularly on Get Real Culture. I've given maybe 125 speeches on Get Real Leadership and probably 25 or 30 on Get Real Culture. So I'm fired up about that. I always have felt like how you treat people, the culture you create, and the ability to free people up to be successful is the way to win in business. And that's really what my story on culture is. So I love the content and the stories. I am more fired up about that one than I am for leadership. And that's why going into 18, having that complementary book, which feeds what I love, which feeds my speeches, makes me happy. Yeah.
And, you've built a real kind of culture around yourself. It's funny, even looking at your book, there's, like a third of the book is people giving compliments to the book, and I think you've got like 40 people here, the authors and executives who are praising the book. So I think you're sort of doing something right in that regard.
Thank you. And by the way, to date, I looked it up this morning. I've raised and donated $313,000 to brain cancer research as a result of my books and speeches. So I'm feeling very, very pleased that I'm able to support my wife and a great cause.
Yeah, and I think that's the amazing part of this in the general is your inspiration was, again, doing all the right things, but not feeling like it was tackling you, allowing you to use your skills and your background to really do something above and beyond. And so I love the motivation for this book of saying it wasn't, a lot of people will decide to write a book after they've had several, career and life successes and saying, this is going to be a way to show everyone what I've accomplished. And you're like, nah, I just already have this stuff. I need to figure out how to monetize it in a way that gives back. And so I think it's a really, really neat approach to it. And I think whether you're just starting out your career or you're midway through, it's an interesting way to frame how you can leverage the knowledge, stories, experiences, and the power of a book to do something awesome.
You know what? That is very, very well said. That is the approach I took. And I won't tell you there was a grand plan, but these seeds of the idea were there, and I embraced the crookedness along the way.
There we go. I love it. That's awesome. So I have a couple questions I want to sort of kind of wrap with here a little bit that are sort of the speed rounds. But I guess before I do that, I just I would like to have you chat a little bit about what you've seen as different or sort of beneficial of having the book be so upfront about benefiting a charity or nonprofit you care about. What kind of things have you seen that it fosters in terms of the way you connect with your audience by saying like this upfront? This is this is something that's created exclusively to sort of benefit my wife, my family as something that we care about to show a cause we're supporting.
Never been asked that question before. Here's my gut reaction. It has people move a little forward in their seat and pay a little bit more attention. I'm getting a little emotional here, but I do it because it's so important to me. I can't imagine not. It's kind of an odd way of saying it, of course. And so when I say it, it helps me connect to the audience. I tend to get some silence. When I talk about how much money I've raised, I get a round of applause, and then I dive into the content. But what I think I've done is I've established something that matters to me personally. Is I'm really a high F guy in Myers-Briggs, and I think that the book, the stories, and why I do what I do does that for me in the first 90 seconds.
Yeah, it's a real tool of authenticity, and I think just even reading just the simple forwards that you have talking about Team Chris Campbell and the Head for the Cure, which I think are the entire sort of efforts that are being supported. It's you get a little emotional reading it, because I think you connect to say this is for a higher purpose. Yeah, there's great stuff in here, but I want you to know why it matters so much. So I think it's an interesting insight that I think it'll be interesting for you as you continue to dive into this one, to sort of understand how much this connects your audience in a way that really does get them to resonate with the content even more so.
Thank you. I will say that the capitalistic part of the business, when people are hiring me to speak, when they find out that I do it for charity and give 100% of my gross fees to charity, what I would say, and this is anecdotal, is that that's cool to them. They feel very good about it, but it is not a driving force behind them hiring me.
That's true.
And I think it's one of the reasons why I like to lead with it, because I'm not hired to do that, but I'm establishing that because that's so important to me and my family personally. They are hiring me because they have a message, or they have a year-end meeting and they want to do some teamwork, or they want to do some culture or leadership learning and personal development. The charity thing is of interest, but it's like sixth on the list. And I'm okay with that. I get it. Yeah. I ran divisions. If I'm going to have a President's Club trip in Maui and I need a motivational speaker, I'm not hiring one because they're giving the money to charity. I'm hiring one who's great at what I need. And if they give to charity, that's cool.
Yeah. I have an author, Tim, who's working on a book profiling that new approach that's out there of people. He profiles companies like Warby Parker and Tom's Shoes that effectively are companies that do great products. And, oh, by the way, also align to a cause and give a pair of glasses to a cause that, a kid in Africa may not have. So it's an interesting insight that you can't just sort of rely on the fact that, oh, hey, this is for a good cause. You have to have a great content, a great book, a great story. Otherwise, the benefit isn't there either. So you had to basically do the work to create a great product for it to have the benefit you want, which is a really good insight.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, Harry, this has been so much fun. I really, really appreciate it. And I want to put in one last plug for Team Chris Campbell. And I think the organization is headforthecure.org /Team Chris Campbell. And you can find Harry all over the place. I think you have a ton of great videos on your site if people want to sort of dive in more. I think we probably could have chatted for many, many hours, but it's just harryscampbell.com. And I think there's a whole bunch of videos that sort of dive in. There was one of my favorites was you talking, I think the day of your book launch, to a group of high school students, and you made reference to you'd sold 170 books that day, and here you are, look at you, 6,000 later. That you thought you might sell 43, and you've well surpassed that.
Thank you. I am my kids tell me I'm very Googleable, and I'm going to take that as a compliment.
The next thing you know, you'll be Snapchatable. So that's the next.
I'm going to go straight to Instagram. I'm going to stay away from Snapchat, maybe.
There we go. I love it. Harry, thank you so much for the time today, and we will call it a wrap. And this has been so much fun. And here's to an exciting 2018.